In this video, I'm going to go into the thought of Sigmund Freud. Now, whereas with Marx and Nietzsche, I had my annotated books, for example, still here on my desk. I have my copy of the Nietzsche Reader. It's got my, you can see I've got some tabs on the side with various annotations inside that I've put in there. Well, so here's my Nietzsche annotations. I don't know if you can see them. I have some Nietzsche annotations. I had the same in my Marx book when we were still in class. My Freud book, on the other hand, my collected works of Sigmund Freud, is still in my office, which I don't have access to. It's still at the university. I do have, as I've posted on Blackboard, the digital or PDF version of the works of Sigmund Freud, but my annotations are still in my office. So what I'm going to do here is to start off, a rudimentary explanation of some Freudian concepts, which in Freud's writings are kind of all over the place. So you've probably heard some aspects of Freud. So some buzzwords, you've probably heard id, ego, superego. You've probably heard of the Oedipus complex. You've probably heard of his psychosexual stages of development, the oral phase, the anal phase. Those are probably the most popular. You've probably heard the concept of neurosis, or, tell me about your childhood. You've probably heard those kinds of things. So I'm going to spend the first part of this video talking about that. Then I'm going to do a little bit of a talk about his later works, especially maybe a little bit about Moses and monotheism, maybe totem and taboo, but most definitely the future of an illusion, which I think is Freud's most important mature work, where he's not just talking about dreams and phalluses and things of that nature. It's there, but not to the same degree. He's doing something a little bit different. So let's talk a little bit about Sigmund Freud, who starts out as a medical doctor. He's born 1856. So when Nietzsche's 12, Freud is alive. He comes, like Marx, from a Jewish background, but in Austria as opposed to Germany. And early on, it's supposed that he has an interest in Nietzsche. Apparently, he bought at some point all of Nietzsche's works and was interested in the work of Nietzsche, but he never really mentions Nietzsche by name, in spite of supposedly doing this. He becomes a medical doctor, and at first, and is studying things like brains, but eventually starts doing something called psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis, and sometimes Freud is considered a progenitor of psychology, psychology being the study of individual minds, as opposed to sociology being the study of humans in society. And psychology today is very much a social science, sometimes doing hard science, and a hard science sometimes doing social science. I think we'd say cognitive science is more of the hard science part of psychology. But psychology, like we have a psychology department at the university, does psychology. If you ask any of the psychologists about Freud, they're not going to think very kindly of Sigmund Freud, because what Freud ends up doing in his theories is it's not psychology, even though he might sometimes call it such. He actually has another word. It's not psychiatry, it is psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis is a particular kind of framework and explanatory model that, much like elements of Marxism, I would argue today, is certainly not considered scientific, but what makes it interesting is the fact that it's a new kind of, as Paul Ricoeur calls it, in the essay that's up on Blackboard, he calls this an element of the school of suspicion. With Freud, even more so than Marx and Nietzsche, some of the particular theories that he posits are considered even more questionable than those of Marx and Nietzsche. So what's interesting in Freud is not so much the content that he offers, all right, in terms, especially prescriptive content, except in The Future of an Illusion, which is a book that we'll get to. But the fact that what he's doing is saying there's something fundamentally wrong, and this is the suspicion aspect, there's something fundamentally wrong in the way in which we as a society have been analyzing ourselves. Remember, Marx, we don't know ourselves because of alienation. Nietzsche, we don't know ourselves because of ressentiment and all our ethical commitments that we've subscribed to in an outdated ethical model. And for Freud, it's we don't really know ourselves because there are aspects about ourselves that we don't even know. There are levels of consciousness that we don't even know. Sure, Fichte talked about consciousness, Kant talked about consciousness, Hegel talked about consciousness, but really there are levels of consciousness. There are times when we're conscious that there are things that we're conscious of that we're not even conscious that we're conscious of. And so this leads Freud to some very specific conclusions that I want to get into. So first of all, let's talk about what Freud's getting at. In his analyses, he has an early book called The Interpretation of Dreams, where he talks about some weird things that happen in dreams. And humans have had dreams for millennia, and it's a strange phenomenon. Sometimes you might have a pet where you think your pet, your dog, or your cat is having dreams as well. Like I know my dog sometimes has these weird spazzes while he's sleeping. I'm wondering, is he dreaming about something? Some philosophers have said, no, other animals don't dream, only humans dream because we have consciousness. A cockroach doesn't dream when it sleeps. I think it's possible that dogs and cats maybe dream in some sense, since they have a greater phenomenological acuity, that is, they're more aware of their environment and can be prone to anxiety. There are some people that say dogs cannot have things like anxiety or emotions or things like that, and I think that's absolutely false. I think a dog can be angry. I think a dog can be sad. But there's not the same kind of phenomenological awareness as human beings have. Because one thing that human beings possess, as someone like Nietzsche and later Heidegger would point out, we can contemplate our own death. An animal can be afraid. You might see an animal have a fight or flight response to something, but a squirrel is not going to go to a bar at the end of the day and drink itself into oblivion thinking life doesn't matter. That's not going to happen. This is a particular phenomenon that we see with humans. And so what goes on with humans, so say of Freud, is that we, our senses, just as Kant said, are we put things into space and time. We have the categories of quantity, quality, relation, modality. We have the transcendental unit of the apperception. All those things are the case. And as the empiricists that we talked about early on in the second lecture of the semester said, we got all this data coming in, and of course, as Hume said, we're conscious of particular aspects of it. There's things that we focus on. So much data coming in that we are not necessarily conscious of all of it. So there's stuff coming in, there's data coming in, it's being received, it's being perceived, but it's not necessarily being perceived actively. So for example, right now, I'm sitting at a table where there are, it just so happens, 6 chairs. Now, I didn't think about those 6 chairs until right now when I was forming that sentence. They've always been there, and there they are, because this computer's on my dining room table. There are various other things in the background, and if I focus in on them, I can see them there, and in my peripheral vision, I can kind of note that they're there. But sometimes there are things going on in the background that I'm not aware of. And Freud says that basically through our senses, we take in a bunch of data, but we're not always focusing on the data that we take in. It's there, and maybe like Locke would have said, it's something that's sensed, it's even something reflected on, but it's not necessarily reflected on actively. Now, just because something's peripheral doesn't mean it's part of the unconscious, as Freud might say later. But Freud basically says, we have all this data just kind of flowing into us, all this information flowing into us. And what we start to do as we develop is we kind of divide what we've received and perceived into certain domains. Of course, Freud comes up with this theoretical division over time. So even when we get to stuff like the id, ego, and the superego, or the das Es, the das Ich, and the das Über-Ich, as Freud would call it, these are things that developed over the course of his career. So he'll talk about the id fairly early on, the ego fairly early on, superego is kind of a late development. It's really even hard to find a place where he talks about all three and says, here's what they are, because there's a development, really even more so than Marx and Nietzsche, there's really a development in Freud's thinking over time. So if you look at Freud in, say, the 1890s versus 1910s versus the 1920s, it's almost like Freud's talking about very different things. His thinking really develops over time, especially in conflict with other thinkers. And so psychoanalysis is basically the belief that, or the system of belief, he'll call it a kind of science that would be objected to today, that we've got all this information coming in, and basically what we do, our minds basically turn certain things off. We've got stuff coming in and we just go, nope. And our minds have ways of putting things in where we receive information, but we kind of cancel that information being dealt with in the forefront of our minds. And that would be the unconscious. So there's things that we know that we don't know that we know. Very similar to Kant's notion of the synthetic a priori. There's things that, as Kant said, there are things that we know that we don't know that we know. And Freud wants to deal with that. He wants to say, yeah, that thing, except it's more than just math problems. There are all kinds of things that our mind deals with that it suppresses and represses that are still present, but we're not aware. We're not consciously aware that those things are nevertheless present in our minds. And so that becomes the notion of the unconscious, which is different from the subconscious, but those words kind of get used interchangeably with Freud. Freud's most significant contribution is something, in my estimation, I know the id, ego, and the superego gets a lot of praise, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but I think Freud's most significant development is his notion of psychosexual development and the notion of sexuality. So when you hear Freud, and I've said this since the beginning of the semester, usually the terminology that comes up is that Freud is obsessed with sex. The Oedipus complex is the obsession that one wants to have, especially the obsession of a boy child in a nuclear family wants to have sex with his mother, like in the old story of Oedipus Rex, where what Oedipus Rex does is he's born of a king and a queen. He gets estranged from his family somehow, and then it's destined that he will murder his father and marry his mother and have children by her. And through the course of that tragedy, I believe by Sophocles, that ends up transpiring unwittingly in the case of Oedipus. So Oedipus, yes, he does kill his father, but he doesn't know it's his father at the time. He does marry his mother and have children by her, but doesn't know it at the time in the context of the story. When we talk about sexuality in Freud, though, there's already a bit of ambiguity because people hear that notion of everything sexual and they think, oh, that's gross. But what Freud means by sexual is actually more like what Schopenhauer or Nietzsche means by desire, simply a wanting. There's a certain sense in which, for Freud, this is going to sound peculiar. When he talks about sexuality, sometimes I think it's translation into English where this gets weird. Sometimes I think it's just a misunderstanding of his conceptions as they are construed. Sexuality is just related to desire, really any kind of desire. If I'm hungry, there's a certain sense in which that sexual desire, therefore, is having a want, sometimes a biological want or desiring, and then desiring for a particular object or thing, or the thing that will satisfy that particular desire. So I'm hungry. Okay, there's a biological desire. I require sustenance, and then I want this kind of food. All right, like I'm hungry for burritos right now. That's for Freud, that could be conceived of as sexual, not because I want to have sex with burritos, which is the wrong way of thinking of it, but that I have a desire and I want the satiation of that desire. Oh man, I'm really thirsty. I want some water. That could be sexual. It's the desire conjoined with a particular notion of what will satisfy that desire, at least in a matured form. In children, Children are sexual, and this is something that with Freud gets very, very controversial. Freud has a notion of infantile sexuality. Children, infants even, babies, are sexual. It's not that they want to have intercourse with things, it's that they have desires, and they have the satiation of desires, or a set of what will satiate those desires. And as we mature as human beings, Freud offers, our notions of what will satiate our desires matures in the sense that they become more complex. So, just in a broad overview, an infant desires to be fed. All right, very early on, an infant will cry when it's hungry. Now, an infant may not know, I desire food right now. I need a certain amount of calories, and you will give them to me right now. It doesn't know that. There's a certain sense in which it just cries out, I'm hungry, feed me. Whereas an adult might think, I'm hungry right now. What things can I get with Uber Eats? Those are two different responses to basically the same kind of stimulus from desire. I'm hungry, I want to eat. I'm hungry, I want to satiate this desire. And what Freud does is he says there's a certain hierarchy of desires in terms of how they grow from simple to more complex. And these are called the psychosexual stages of development, of which Freud posits there are 5. Now, if you look at other psychologists, sociologists, sociopsychologists, I can think of, we can look at Jung, we can look at Adler, we can look at Piaget, and some other scientists, for example, that would study this phenomenon of childhood development. Nevertheless, what they do, even when they're correcting Freud, is they're going off Freud. So here's Freud's psychosexual stages of development. The first psychosexual stage, and there are 5. So here are the 5 phases of psychosexual development. And what they mean, because often I'll see these things get kind of joked about, like, oh, the oral phase. What do they mean? The first phase is the oral phase. So we're looking at the development of human beings here. The oral phase, or the oral stage, is this. When children are born, what is the first thing that infants desire? I talked about this a moment ago. Was the first, not really the first thing, the only thing. No infant is born saying, hey, I would like to have some high yield savings accounts and put my money into stock options and dividends. No 3-week-old is going to say that. The first thing that an infant wants is to be fed. That's the first desire that they have, and the first desire that they articulate. Now, they don't articulate it in a mature manner. How are children, young children, satiated? Well, they're satiated by being fed. Either a breast is inserted into their mouth, or something mimicking a breast, namely a bottle with a nipple, is inserted into their mouth, and that satiates their desire. A young child will cry because they want to be fed. A really young child will not cry because they've soiled their diaper. They'll only cry because feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. That's what they want. That's the first thing we want as human beings. And this is something that biologically makes sense. What do all living things want? To consume in order to survive. There is no living entity that does otherwise. This is part of the reason why when we talk about the definition of living things, viruses may not be considered living things, because although they consume, they don't consume for the production of energy, they don't reproduce in the same way, they're not self-contained in the same way. So viruses are probably not living beings, even though they be things that mimic living beings in some kind of way. And even some scientists would say that living beings are actually more advanced than viruses. Bacteria do something different. Prokaryotes, eukaryotes, they do something different. But viruses are a whole nother beast, not literally. So this is the first phase of human development, oral desire. All our wanting is done with the mouth. This orifice right here does all the desiring. And to be deprived of that, and this is what Freud is going to say in the concept of neurosis, and neurosis is some kind of psychological problem that we have in behavior in our development. Sometimes we go askew as how we ought to be as human beings because of some sort of deprivation or something that didn't happen here. So when you hear Freud talk about oral fixations, like people biting their nails, people smoking cigarettes, cigars, people, sucking on their thumb. What's going on there is some kind of desire early on, Freud will say, got messed up, and we try and kind of make up for that desire by defaulting to this. This is what an oral fixation is. Okay? Because what we want early on is just to sate our desires. You want a happy baby? Feed that baby. It's going to be happy. If that baby is not fed, it's not going to be happy. But that is where the happiness of a very, very young child is satiated. It's through its oral fixation. It's going to be fed, whether it be through a bottle or through natural breast. That's how it's going to be satiated. And what we do with children is, young children, is we satiate the desire either with the intent of what the desire is meant to do. So if a child is crying because they're hungry, we're going to stick a bottle or a breast in its mouth. But if we don't have that opportunity, another way that we satiate the desire is through synthetic stimulation. So let's assume that you're not the mother and you don't have any breast milk or you don't have any formula around. Today in our culture, what do we do with children who are crying, young children who are crying and they won't be quiet? We literally shove a facsimile of a nipple, really imitating a breast, into their mouth. What do we call it? It's a pacifier. You might have other names for it. It might be a bob-bar, it might be a binky. But what we do is we get young children to shut up by shoving a fake nipple representing a breast into their mouth, almost mimicking their satiation in something that is not satiating. There's no milk coming in through the pacifier, but it's, you're crying, put that in your mouth and shut up. That is the function of a pacifier. We're trying to satiate a desire without actually filling the desire by kind of manipulating the satiation of the desire. That is the entire function of a pacifier. So in some of these senses, I think Freud, there's a lot of ways in which we can critique Freud today in modern science. I think he's really on point with this one, that our earliest desire is nutritive desire. We want to feed. And we kind of stopgap that desire by putting things in place that kind of substitute the actual satiation of that desire. And this is something, this phase or stage lasts for basically the first year of life. Yeah, in the past, sometimes jokes have been made of this, like how long are children supposed to breastfeed or feed on formula or bottles? That's up for debate. Today, it's about up to a year. In previous centuries, it had been much longer. Now, if you see someone today breastfeeding their child and their child is 4 years old, that's going to be controversial today. It wouldn't necessarily have been as controversial in the past, especially when formula is a recent invention. Baby food, as we know it, is a recent invention too. So this is not something that's always been the case. So that's phase number one. This is the first phase where we've got desires, and they're not sophisticated. We just want to eat. Bacteria want to do that. They just want to eat. They just want to feed. Pretty much even tardigrades want to do that. They just want to feed. They just want to. They just want to feed. They just want to eat. They just want to consume. That is pretty much one of the most basic biological functions is consumption, and the biological impetus for the consumption, for the desire of consumption. Phase one. Phase two. And this could be, Freud will put it basically up to about 3 years old. It can go older, it can go younger. This is called the anal phase. And the difference between it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So people hear oral phase and think we've got oral desire. We want to put things in our oral orifice. Oh, anal phase. That must be we want to put things in our anal orifice. No, that's not what Freud is saying. The anal phase is simply this. The next desire that children have is really bodily control. And some of this is because it's a social condition. Okay, so one of the first things we do with children, we start feeding them, whether it be through breasts or bottles, through natural milk or through formula. We get them feeding, and then our next expectation upon children, and this is where we start to impose certain kinds of social restrictions on them. The next thing we expect children to do, little babies, we expect a little baby to fill its diaper without any sense of control whatsoever. Uh-oh, you pooped yourself. Like, it's just something we expect a young child to do. We don't expect a 20-year-old to do that, to fill their diaper, or a 30-year-old, or a 10-year-old, or even a 5-year-old. What starts to happen is in the toddler years, we expect children to exert bodily control, and that's what the anal phase is a child starts to become aware of its body as its body, and we impose that you will control your body. This ought to be your desire. You have a desire to go to the bathroom. That's even the afraid. We don't talk about you have to micturate or you have to defecate. Those are the fancy ways of talking. You have to piss or you have to shit. We don't talk about it that way. We say, oh, do you have to go potty? Do you have to go to the bathroom? And we even put it in the phrasing of where you need to go, not what you have to do, but where you need to go. You need to go potty. Go to the bathroom. Go to the lavatory. Whatever you want to call it. We talk about it. You do this here. And what we start to do here is we also start to, says Freud, kind of enforce into children a notion of privacy. This is part of the anal phase. Notions of boundaries, notions of, yeah, we don't just go to the bathroom. We go to the bathroom in the bathroom with the door shut. You'll notice that little children, like a 2-year-old, will, if it fills its diaper with feces, will just go, I went potty, or I need to poop. You'll see little kids say, I need to go potty. And for a child, that makes perfect sense. If an adult does that, if you're, I don't know, if you're, like, if we were in class and one of you in class just yells out, I need to go potty, and then makes a run for the bathroom, we would find that peculiar behavior, because what happens here in the anal phase is that there's an expectation that children need to learn you will control your behavior here. And not only will you control your bodily functions, that's what needs to be learned here. You need to go to the bathroom, you will do it in the bathroom. You need to defecate, you won't do it in your pants. You won't even do it in your diaper. You will do it on the toilet. But not only will you do it there, you won't talk about it, because notions of privacy are also developed here in the anal phase too. That's all, like bodily privacy. We don't talk about those body parts. Part of the anal phase sensitivity is also the fact that when we hear bodily organs mentioned, especially what we consider private parts, that if we get a feeling of, ugh, those are private words, or it makes us uncomfortable. So if we talk about the anus or the rectum, or we start talking about the urethra, or we talk about the penis or the vagina or the vulva or the scrotum, or any of those kinds of things, and if those words make you uncomfortable, Freud is saying, yeah, that's because in the anal phase we were taught that all those things about our bodily functions, especially there, and our excretory and sexual functions, are to be relegated as private. Not just private in the sense of that we're not open about it, but in the sense that those need to be relegated to really unmentionables. Okay, even the New Testament sometimes refers to what we consider private parts as really unmentionables, or the dishonorable parts, the unhonorable parts of our anatomy. And really, it's in the anal phase that we're taught, like, there are certain things that we don't just do. You don't just shit your pants. But not just that, you don't talk about shitting your pants. That's the anal phase. And this can go up to about 3 years old. If, like, again, this is why if a 1-year-old fills their diaper, we go, okay, they're 1. But if a 20-year-old fills their diaper, that, barring some sort of special circumstance, we say that's not normal and you need to get it together. And this is usually where punishment begins in children too. This is where there's the sense of enforcement from parents. So there's lots of, in the anal phase, there can be a lot of neuroses that develop from parents being too punishing. So Freud's going to imply that what can happen is, if you're not as in control of your bodily functions, let's say something like, this is something that happens with children, like wetting their beds. It's a lack of anal function. Yes, micturition, peeing the bed, has nothing to do with the anus, but it has to do with the anal phase. It has to do with bodily functions. That there's maybe anxieties that can result if you're, let's say you're 10 and you're going over to sleep over at a friend's house, and you're terrified of peeing in your sleeping bag when you're over at your friend's house. That anxiety is something that results from a lack of control in the anal phase. That's what Freud would say, and that could lead to problems in adulthood. Maybe you have certain anxieties and fears of dealing with other people because there's something that happened to you when you were afraid of peeing the bed at a friend's house when you were 10, because you didn't develop the apparently appropriate self-control when you were 3. Then what starts to happen is after this, from about, Freud would say 3 to 6 years old, I think Piaget would agree with this for the most part, you have what's called the Phallic Stage. What happens in the Phallic Stage is the child begins to truly identify with their gender. Now, Freud would say here sex, okay? And I think that's fair. And usually for Freud, because he's writing in the 19th century, there is almost a one-to-one identity between sex and gender. So what Freud's going to say is, and this is fairly obvious to us, I think even today, look at children's toys for young children. Okay, I mean like children under 3, so like the play school toys, Little Tykes, all that kind of stuff. If you go to a toy store or any kind of store and you look at toys for young children, they are all the same. They might have different color palettes. Like here's this, like I can think of Scout, the puppy, is green for boys, but kind of a pink and purple for girls. You'll have Duplos that are kind of blue and green for boys and pink and purple for girls. But in spite of the different color palettes, they're the exact same toys. Look at the clothes for young children. Lots of onesies. Lots of, part of the apparatus of a child. Lots of bibs. Like if you look at children's clothes, all the little the little blankets that they have, it's really the same stuff with just different color palettes. The room might be pink versus blue, but the crib's going to be the same. The toys might be pink versus blue, but the toys are going to be the same for young children. And even if you're looking at, unless you have the color palette to inform you, especially because, children's hair kind of grows in the same way, unless like a parent has put like a little bow or a barrette in a young girl baby's hair, you're not going to really be able to tell if a baby is a girl or a boy. They don't have developed sexual characteristics. There's a sense in which young children are androgynous. They lack a sexual identity, even though we impose a gender identity upon them. This is a little girl, this is a little boy. Freud would say at this point, young children, yeah, it's ambiguous. I could show you photographs of my great-grandfather where it almost looks like he's wearing a dress, because that's something that was popular in the 1800s. Okay, it's very difficult to tell with young children, boys versus girl, unless you were looking at them in the nude just based on their sexual characteristics alone, which would be ridiculous. So what starts to happen at about 3 to 6 years of age is that parents and others start imposing gender categories on children, predicated typically in the past, as Freud would talk about, because he's talking about this in the late 19th century, predicated upon their assigned sexuality at birth. Okay. Furthermore, children kind of start doing this to themselves. This is the age where boys start becoming associated with their penis. Right? They start if you ever see little boys at about this age, they might not have the vocabulary. They might use some other synonym for penis, but they will start talking about what they've got down there. They will start talking about it. They will do all kinds of things with it. I know this is the father of 2 boys. But also, this is where we start imposing, and they start extrapolating young children their gender roles. Like boys, this is where it's appropriate. So young children are basically identical. 1-year-old girls and 1-year-old boys are basically playing with the same toys, doing the same stuff. Now, boys, you need to go out, play in the mud, play in the dirt, climb trees, start doing that stuff. Girls, now is the point where you'll start brushing your hair and wearing dresses and those kinds of things. Okay? This is really where the gender identity becomes realized. Not fully, but it starts to be implemented here, both through external interpolation and through internal recognition. Dad's a man because he has certain biological characteristics. I must be a man too, so this is why you have, for this age group, For boys, often you'll have like little shave kits where they put like foam on their face and they shave their faces because they want to be like dad. And little girls, they're going to be like mom. So whatever that means. And so sometimes the feminine toys are kind of second nature because the advent of those has been far more recent. But this is called the genital phase. That is where identity starts to occur. Identity starts to be connected with genitalia. And it's not merely biological. Boys start to realize that I can do certain things because I'm a boy. Girls start to realize they especially can't do certain things because they're not a boy. Can't do certain things because they're a girl. Now, at this point, Freud is not saying this is necessarily good or bad. In fact, I think he thinks it's fairly good. Later Freudians, or people influenced by Freud, Luce Rigore, Simone de Beauvoir, are going to critique this strongly. And Judith Butler even more so. Okay, queer theorists of not that all the people I just mentioned are queer theorists, but even more so in queer theory. Like, this is something that's been an imposition of the past. This is where we get the hard connection between sexuality and gender that has been mostly dismissed, I think, in 21st century theory. But this is where it starts. Right here, this age group, there's an identity with your biology. This genitalia is who I am. And there are features of this. So what starts to develop here is boys, says Freud, start to develop what's called castration anxiety. What castration anxiety is, in an ultimate sense, is boys start to kind of identify with their penis, and they start to think of, there's a fear of losing the penis, not just physically, like it's going to fall off, but that there's a sense in which I might lose my privileges of being a boy, and I don't want to do that. Whereas young girls and women, Freud says, start to develop what's called penis envy. This is a term which has been wholly deprived of its meaning. Penis envy is not some sort of neurotic hysteria. What penis envy is for Freud is that basically girls or women realize that their status is kind of subdued once they get to a point where their gender becomes paramount. Like, there are certain things in society, especially in the 19th century, you're not allowed to do as a girl, you're not allowed to do as a woman, because you lack male genitalia. You're not a man. And it's because ultimately you don't have a penis and testes. It's a penis fight. All right? Penis envy. Like, you don't have that, and there's a sense in which young girls realize I don't get to be like the boys, and that's not fair. And that kind of frustration is what penis envy is. It's not, again, some sort of rampant nymphomaniac desire for sex, but it is the recognition that there are certain things that I, as a woman, as a female, cannot do. And that starts at this age group. Again, young babies, there's not that kind of division. Okay? Like, you might have remembered this in high school. I remember, when sex ed classes came up, the boys and the girls were divided. Okay? You're not going to see that same kind of division in elementary school. Sure, with bathrooms, we've got it. We still have it with bathrooms. It's kind of a genital phase division. But early on, girls and boys are going to be changed in a young nursery right next to each other. It's nothing. People don't consider it at all. That starts to develop, especially at this phase. This is called the genital phase. You are a boy, you are a girl. And usually, sometimes I think there's kind of an imposition of alterity with the other gender at this point. Girls have cooties when you're 4. Or boys have cooties, like, ugh, when you're 4 or 5. The other sex, the other gender is gross. Okay, and that starts to happen so that one becomes confident in their own status. The fourth phase is the latent phase. Now, what starts to happen here in the latent phase is not much. Really, the gender roles become more codified, and they become more rigid over time in terms of the roles. Boys are told to be more like boys, play sports. Okay, play basketball. Girls are told to be more like girls. Okay, grow your hair out longer. But there's not really any what we call explicitly sexual desire at this point. The libido, and what the libido is for Freud is sexual desire. Now, there's a certain sense, like I said early on in this video, libido refers to really any kind of desire, but it's also the desiring faculty almost for Freud. So being really hungry is libido.
But there's a specific sense in which libido refers to specifically sexual desire. I have a sexual desire. I want my reproductive organs to go through an orgasmic experience, and I want that to be satiated. There's that specific example, but there's a more general sense in which libido is any kind of desire, kind of like what Schopenhauer was getting at with the Wille zum Leben, that we all will something. Even Siddhartha Gautama said that we have all this desire that leads to suffering. That for Buddha leads to suffering, dukkha leads to suffering, but that in the latent phase, children continue to develop basically unto puberty, and their roles develop, but their desire is kind of inactive. Like they have desires, they want to do things, but usually not sexual desire. And then what finally happens, the final stage, is the genital stage of psychosexual development, which is basically from puberty unto death. What starts to happen is your secondary sexual characteristics take on a whole new level of meaning. So, for example, me, I am a cisgendered male. I have a much lower voice. My voice is not particularly low. I can get it there if I really wanted to. But this is a voice I could not do 30 years ago. It would have been very high pitched. I think I have recording somewhere of my pre-adolescent voice, very high pitched, but because of certain hormones, my voice has gotten lower. My body has developed in a certain way. And all of our bodies, based on the hormones that we have in place, develop in a certain way, naturally speaking. Now, there are ways in which those things can be blocked, either naturally or through artificial means, surely. But at least Freud's going to say, at least in an uninterventional state of affairs, these things are just going to develop in a particular way. Our bodies develop in a particular way that Freud is going to say typically corresponds to the gender we were assigned at birth, in correspondence to the sex we were assigned at birth. And I distinguish between those two notions because I've read Judith Butler once or twice. But, more than that. But, this influences our specifically what we would think of as sexual interests. That is to say, all the stuff that happened before, the stuff that happened in the oral phase, the stuff that happened in the anal phase, the stuff that happened in the phallic phase, and the stuff that happened in the latent phase, all influences the kind of sexual desires that we have in the mature genital phase. Because what we like in the genital phase, and I'm not saying it's the only thing that we like in the genital phase, but this is something that is very peculiar to adulthood and maturity, that we have very specific sexual desires. Okay? Okay, that is desires with our reproductive organs. There are things that we like, things that we don't like. There's a sense in which hunger is still sexual for Freud. Okay? Like, I like this kind of food. I want to have that kind of food. I want to have that kind of food. Like, if I have a hankering for pizza, I want to get pizza. If I have a hankering for particular, like, maybe I want to drink Coca-Cola Classic. I want to drink Coca. I'm not going to be satiated until I get otherwise. Children can have that experience. But young children can't have the same kinds of mature sexual desires, and even the more peculiar sexual desires that human beings can have as they develop. And those things can get, Freud will say, more and more peculiar, and not peculiar in the sense of not weird, but peculiar in the sense of specific. There's certain features that we might particularly respond to sexually. Like in different cultures find different things attractive. For example, today in Western culture, it is almost encouraged for males to like females who have augmented breasts, augmented buttocks, but very, very thin otherwise. That's considered attractive. That would not have been considered attractive 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or even 200, like 1,000 years ago in Western culture. In other cultures, different things would be considered attractive at different times and different places. These things fluctuate, but then those norms are then promulgated throughout society, and then we're kind of told to desire the thing that we desire, and then we desire the thing that we're told to desire. Now, I gave that example, and it could be the same thing with men. All right, a particular vision of men, a very chiseled man, or even I've seen in recent years, the dad bod's kind of attractive. These are the kinds of things you see on magazine covers. These are the images that are promulgated. These are meant to really titillate the desires of the genital phase. These are why we have things on. These are why we have scantily clad people, regardless of sex or gender, on particular magazine covers. These are the things you should desire. These are the things you want to desire. These are the things you do desire. Hopefully, this magazine will help facilitate that desire. That's the point, and that's why someone like Slavoj Žižek, whose material I have a little bit up on Blackboard, takes the notion of alienation from Marx and the notion of the psychosexual desire from Freud and kind of puts them together. And that's why, just as Marx talked about commodity fetishism, Freud talks about particular, in this phase, sexual fetishes, particular sexual things that we desire. And really that notion of sexuality, of things specifically that we want to satiate our desires, is a synthesis of Marxist or Marxian fetishism and Freudian fetishism put together. So those are the psychosexual stages of development. I'll talk now a little bit about how these lead to neuroses and how this mixes up with the notions of id, ego, and superego, or the das Es, the das Ich, and the das Über-Ich, as Freud would have called it. Okay, now that we've talked about Freud's psychosexual stages of development, what I want to do now is talk a little bit about his notions of the das Es, the das Ich, and the das Über-Ich, which really, this is going to be a conglomeration of things he says in The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, and the ego and the id. There's never a book called The Ego, the Id, and the Superego where he comes out and says everything. So this is related to his whole notion of the psychosexual stages of development, which is why I did those first. So let's talk about, first of all, the id. What is the id? The id is the das Es. It means basically the it. In German, the it. The first thing that we have is just a desiring faculty. If you go back to those psychosexual stages of development, we talk about the oral phase. Infants don't care about your feelings. Little kids don't care about your feelings. You're the cutest baby you can possibly imagine. It doesn't care about you. What does it care about? Feed me. That's it. That's all it cares about. Is it wants to satiate its primary and primal desire of being fed. That's all it wants. That's all it desires. And even as children continue to develop, when they go into the anal phase, what do they care about? What's mine? You see little kids, mine. I want what's mine. Kids are just almost saturated with desire. I want this and I want that. Now, as Schopenhauer has already articulated, that doesn't really change as we grow. What starts to happen as we get older and as we develop is there's a refinement of desire. We still desire things. Like as adults, we still want stuff in the same way that little children want things. We maybe don't cry about it in the same way. Maybe we do. But we want stuff. That's a feature of existence, maybe even biological existence, but especially conscious existence, is that we want stuff. But what starts to happen with the anal phase is that there are restrictions on how you can want something. So you might have, as an adult, you might have particular desires, but it might not be couth to say those desires out loud. So this frequently happens when we're talking about sexuality. You might have particular sexual desires. You might see someone that's sexually attractive, and you might think to yourself, I find that person sexually attractive. I'd like to have sexual relations with them. But that's hopefully not the first thing that comes out of your mouth. Like, hey, I just met you. You're attractive. I'd like to have sexual interactions with you. No, that would be entirely inappropriate. And that's where the ego starts to come into play, as the ego becomes our, and really that's the superego there. The ego is our identity. The ego is our notion of self. The ego is not merely our desires, but the ego is our identity of ourselves. Okay? This is who I am. These are the particular desires that
I have. The ego is the, and again, it's the das Ich. It's the same phrase Fichte used for the individual consciousness. The ego is me. That's who I am. Now I have particular desires, and sometimes my id and my ego can be in conflict. There's the id. There's what I really really want, and then there's the ego, who I am. But there can be a disconnect there, as I just said a moment ago. There's the desires that I have, and then there's the person that I am. And sometimes if I want to be the person that I am, I can't say the desires that I have out loud, and that's where the Über-Ich comes into play. The Über-Ich, or the superego, is kind of like a bouncer for the mind. You, from your various stages of development, have all these desires. We have all these desires. All the desires, we have a whole host. They're all, in a certain sense, sexual, because that's what Freud just means by sexual, is any kind of desire. Again, you want a snack. That's sexual. It doesn't mean you want to have sex with your snack. But we can still talk about sexual behavior as being behavior that desires. It's not reducible to sexual in the sense that we usually talk about it when we talk about copulation or some sort of orgasmic desire. That's not what it always means for Freud. It just really means any kind of desire. So we've got that going on. Okay, that's the id, just all the desires that we have, which you may be aware of and you may not be, because the ego, as we develop, you'll recognize that the things that we are, we don't just merely relegate to our desires. In fact, a lot of discourse we talk about, Nietzsche talked about this, how what Christianity does is we have our desires and then we have who we are, and we say, no, we can't do all the desires. The desires can be bad. Freud's not saying that. Freud's not saying that all desires are good, and he's not saying that all desires are bad, but what we have in our minds is we have this other feature called the superego in English, or the Über-Ich, and what it does, it means like the over-I, is it basically, it's like I said, like it's like the bouncer for the ego. Your id comes in and says, hey, I have this desire. I'd like to mention this to the ego, please. Please tell myself I want this. And the ego says, or the superego says, like, all right, fine, you can come in. So the superego is kind of like a regulating agent between the id and the ego. It says, all right, there are certain things, desires that can come in. You're like, all right, id, you say you're hungry, you want a snack. Ego, this one can come in, you should get something to eat, that's fine. Okay, but then if the id comes in and says, I want to kill this person, all right, id, you say you want to kill somebody. Ego, you don't even know, like, I'm not even going to mention this. Like, you don't need to kill anybody. That's not going to be good for you in society. No one's going to like it, but I'm not even going to tell you this. I'm not going to even bother, because I'm not going to let this one in. You're not even going to know that it's there. And so that's what the superego does. It ends up being kind of a restrictive fulcrum that stops things from the id coming into the ego. So that doesn't mean those things aren't there. Doesn't mean, and so for Freud, much of what the subconscious is, or the unconscious mind, is the stuff that the superego is not letting into the ego and blocking it off and letting it stay in the id. All those desires are there. Okay, there's things that you want, like maybe you're really angry at somebody and you actually want to kill them, and the superego says, turn that shit down. Ego, like, you're good, just tone it down. Like, the id wants this, like, just, like, you're good, just stop it. Like, you're still friends with Jenny, alright? Id, stop it. I know you want to kill Jenny, knock it off, I'm not even going to let you in here. That's what the superego does. The superego regulates. It's a regulative faculty, and the superego has basically come into being because of society. Because of our evolutionary development, the superego has come into place to say there are certain things that we shouldn't do. And in people that are neurotic, the superego doesn't work as it should. So in people that are neurotic, people who later psychologists and criminologists will call psychopaths, sociopaths, those people have a superego that doesn't work right. So the superego goes, hey, you want to kill somebody? Id, you want to kill somebody? Ego, the id wants to kill somebody. You should do that. And that's where neuroses end up lying often. Is in one version, it's the fact that the superego is not performing its regulative faculty of keeping things out. But then also, since the superego functions as a bouncer, if the stuff in the id is really strong,
and the superego is doing everything it can to keep the desires of the id out. Nevertheless, the id ends up taking a lot of space. So maybe the superego is regulating everything as it should, but okay, id, I see you have this desire here, and I'm not going to let you in, but can you, like, tone it down, please, a little bit? And that can be another form of repression. So repression can be either the id going, I'm not going to let you into the ego, or it can be like, whoa, you're taking up a lot of space, and I can't let you in, but wow, you're just loud. And so repression can be things, it can be desires, but it can also be elements about desire as well. So maybe we have a memory of something that happened to us, and basically the superego faculty says, hey, that would be disastrous to the ego. If the ego knew if the ego remembered, if the self remembered that this traumatic event occurred, the ego would be done for. It would be shot. Kick it out. And that's part of how repression works. And basically, neuroses then for Freud are where there are aberrations in this system or in the psychosexual stages of development. So for example, in the anal phase, if a child wasn't having a successful time regulating its bathroom, his or her bathroom habits, like just, I can't keep it in. I keep, like, I'm not like, a child's not wearing diapers anymore, but they still keep defecating in their pants, and the parents end up shaming them, like, you shit yourself again, how dare you. That's going to lead to self-esteem and anxiety issues, which are going to result in the ego having issues today. And the superego often is going to overcompensate for that by saying, like, any anxiety, like anything that involves anxiety, nope, keep it out. And the superego can't compensate. So there's all kinds of ways in which the superego is supposed to regulate us, not because of some moral status, but because of some situational status. Now, is this a scientific theory? Is there an id, an ego, and a superego? I think most scientists would balk at this today. There's no empirical evidence for this whatsoever. But I think the important thing to get under Freud, the thing that he's doing that I think is worthwhile, is to say there are things going on beneath the surface of our conscious experience that we're not aware of. And I think that's fair. There are things going on in the brain that we're not conscious of. I think even cognitive sciences will tell you this today. And I think therefore he does have a point. Like, when you have pleasurable experiences, there's ways in which serotonin and dopamine are affecting your brain. You don't know that your brain is going, oh, serotonin, oh, that feels great. Dopamine, oh, fantastic. You're not conscious of those experiences. You don't see the dendrites working in your brain. You don't see the neurons activating that wouldn't otherwise work unless you were having a particular experience. So, Freud's point, there's something going on beneath the surface. And also, the experiences that we're not completely aware of, nevertheless affect our awareness of our experiences around us, I think is worth pointing out. And so that's what Freud gets at, that I think is an important reflection, even if it need not be scientific. Now, someone like other thinkers like Jacques Lacan and Slavoj Žižek are going to take a lot of Freud's work and apply it into circumstances. They're going to apply it in Marxist and Hegelian frameworks in ways that I think make sense and help us explain the world. Again, the theme that I want to stress that I think is right in Freud, even if the particulars are not completely right, is there's stuff going on beneath the surface that we're not aware of. Just as Marx talked about alienation, we're not aware of it. Just as Nietzsche talked about ressentiment and the frustrations that we have, and we're not entirely aware of it. Freud's doing something similar. There's a suspicion here. As Ricoeur said, there's something going on beneath the surface that, like, I think of the children's books Madeline, when Miss Clavel turned out the light, she realized something was not right. That's what's going on here. Freud is saying something's not right in us as human beings, and something is further not right in our inherited experience, especially in Christian Europe. The way that we've said, like, the way things are, something's not right here. Like, even if you take Christianity as a given, there's too much weird stuff going on in the background for that to be accurate, right, or true. Now, Freud, early in his career, applies this kind of stuff to individuals. Okay, this is the reason why particular individuals have neurotic experiences, sexual problems. The Oedipus complex, for example, is something that results from
what Freud says in that psychosexual development, what the Oedipus complex is specifically, is that young girls, because they start to realize their penis envy, that is, they're not boys, they start to attract themselves to the father figure, okay, and start to resent the mother because the mother is trying to, especially has a 19th century gender framework in mind, but the mother is trying to instill in them and inculcate in them, especially mom says you will have tea parties, you will be a lady, and that the young woman who's developing starts to realize that the father is the powerful figure and wants to emulate that. Like, I want to be like that. All right, and actually Jung calls that the electric complex. The boy, on the other hand, realizes that the father is a figure who, that's where the power resides. Like, I'm a child, I don't have the power. Dad has the power. I want to be dad, and I love my mom because she's sweet to me, and dad has all the power. I want to have that power. That's the id having desire. If taken literally, it is not that everyone wants to kill their father and have intercourse with their mother. That is not what Freud is saying. That is how it has been interpreted time and time again. That's not right. What it is that in an infantile, puerile, and childish way, children want to emulate the power structures that they see in their parents. They appreciate parents, and it need not be mom and father today exactly, but they appreciate when their parents are kind and gentle to them. They respond to that in an effectual way, but at the same time, there's a sense in which they're kind of desirous of the power that parents have. I can remember, for example, I wouldn't say this is Oedipal, Freud would say it is. I remember thinking when I was a child how my father seemed tall. Like when I was a little kid, I remember being like 5 or 6, and my dad just seeing me like a giant, going, I want that. I want to be tall like my father. Today, I am like a full head taller than my father. It's not great, right? I literally look down at my father and my mother, who's even shorter, but like a full foot, much taller than them. And it's not great. But I remember thinking that as a 5-year-old, like I want to be taller than you. I'm gonna look down on you, and I'm jealous of the fact that you're so tall today, like a giant. Okay. Again, that's a desire that's been fulfilled, not great. And that's another thing that someone like a Freudian like Lacan will point out, spends a lot of time talking about. This stuff has been up on Blackboard too, is that a lot of our desires are stupid. Okay, some of that can be influenced by emotion. Like, again, if you've ever been through like a painful breakup and you're like, I can't live without you, I love you so much, and I just want to think. And then you give it time and you're like, wow, that person was terrible. Why was I in love with this person? That will happen. Sometimes emotion can distort our desires. Sometimes we wish certain things. How many times in our adolescence did we like maybe plead with the divine, if you'll just do this, I promise I will do. Yeah, of course we desire strong things. We have strong desires. Desires also we would never say out loud and never tell anyone else. Desires that we would keep most private when they're in our heads. We're very thankful for the privacy of our own minds. There's things that we want strongly that we would never utter out loud. Maybe even to ourselves. We wouldn't even admit them to ourselves. That's something Freud talks about too. Is that sometimes people who are pretentious, like, no, I don't desire that. Well, yeah, they do. They just would never say it. Not just that. Maybe they're not even aware that it's a desire that they have. That's part of Freud's theory of suspicion. Now, as I've said already, Freud initially applies this to individuals. This is what's going on in this individual person, have this individual experience in their childhood. And yeah, again, I know we kind of mock and saying, oh, what happened in your childhood? Was your father very influential in your life? What did he do to you? And we see these kinds of examples in storytelling all the time. I think to kind of get rid of this in the 20th century, I think that's why almost every major Disney character doesn't have a living mother. Or a living father, or sometimes both, but usually there's no mother figure present. Okay, I can think of a few exceptions. Sarabi, Lion King. Otherwise, especially one with a princess. Give me a story about a princess who has a living mother that's a Disney film. Give me one where the mother is living. If you're going, I can't find one, that's why. It avoids the Oedipus complex altogether. It ends up not being a problem. That's why you can instill such innocent desires in such a young protagonist, especially female protagonist. If it's a male protagonist, mom might be okay. Maybe. Lion King, Shirabi. She's around for a while. Gets enslaved by Scar. That's bad, but it's not terrible. Bambi, male protagonist. Mom gets killed, but mom's there in the beginning. Most of the time in Disney films, if you have a female protagonist, mother is dead or gone. Couple of exceptions. Why? You avoid the Oedipal problem altogether. She's a blank slate for desire. She might not even have desires. She doesn't know what she wants, which is why the prince can swoop in and do whatever, whether that be Aurora or Snow White or Jasmine or Belle, or look, the list goes on, right? No maternal element. You don't have to worry about the Oedipal at all. It's gone. Your hero is a blank slate, something open. It's a peculiar phenomenon. And other Simone de Beauvoir in Le Deuxième Sexe, or The Second Sex, will tell you why that's the case, is because that gets rid of any notion of feminine exemplar that you could possibly need. She's both an admirer and a critic of Freud. I strongly recommend looking at her work too, Simone de Beauvoir. But from this, I've already talked about Freud's description of individuals. What Freud starts to do in his later writings is apply these notions of psychosexual development and notions of consciousness, like we have our central awareness, and then there's peripheries of our awareness, stuff that we're taking in, but we're not aware that we're aware of. Okay, like if I asked you what was I wearing in the last video I made, you might actually know in the deep innards of your brain, but you weren't conscious of it, kind of like with those synthetic a priori judgments that Kant mentioned in the Critique of Pure Reason. So, in the later works of Freud, that I'm going to get into in a moment, especially focusing on the future of illusion, I might mention a little bit of Moses and monotheism and civilization and its discontents, just by way of aside. But what I really want to focus on is the future of illusion, because Freud basically takes his conceptualizations and applies them, basically a social psychoanalysis, applies them to society at large, and basically says we kind of have a collective unconscious, a collective subconscious, a collective consciousness, a collective id, a collective ego, a collective superego, and we kind of have those collective psychosexual stages of development as well. There's certain things as a society we just dismiss. That's our superego. It's our collective superego. There's certain things we embrace, and that, again, desire leads us to do stupid things. That's a theme in Freud. On a fundamental level, our desires are good. This is something Nietzsche talked about. Nietzsche was all the embracing of desire. Freud wants to say, yeah, desire is great. Like, you need to eat. For the propagation of a species, people need to reproduce. These basic biological desires make perfect sense. But when the desire gets turned up in excess, that's where you get, when it comes to food, you get obesity. When it comes to sexuality, you get rapaciousness, you get rape and sexual assault. Desires are great. Desires are good. Even those things are, you should want to eat. Like, have a good meal, have a good, healthy sexual relationship with someone. Those are good things. No one would disagree with that. That those things are good in themselves. It's when you turn it up too much, when the desire gets turned up too much. Now, I don't just want food, I want all the food. Okay, I don't just want sexual satisfaction, I want all the sexual satisfaction. I want to just do nothing but experience the orgasmic constantly. I want to do nothing but eat constantly. I don't want to do nothing but drink constantly. I want to do nothing but feel pleasure constantly. Adamant heat. No. All right, pleasure's good, but seeking out pleasure for its own sake, not good. And society, it's not just individuals that recognize that. We look at the people that do that in excess and we say, no, that's bad. But even society has its own kind of controls.
There's a certain sense in which the state or the powers of the state are kind of a super ego for our society. The police say, no, 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 you can't do that. It's kind of like the super ego telling the desire of the culture. Culture, you want to do this? Cool, get in line. Get with the identity of society. You're not going to be allowed in. And many thinkers, I think, especially, like I said, Jacques Lacan, Slavoj Žižek, I would even put Louis Althusser in there. In many ways, even though they're dealing with Marxist and Nietzschean elements, Michel Foucault too, they also bring the Freudian aspect in as well, saying that Freud's onto something here with this, especially when it comes to societal notions. So in this next bit, I'm going to talk especially about the future of illusion and talk about those societal notions of psychosexual development and the tripartite division of the self for society, and also look at a peculiar distinction that Freud makes between delusion and illusion, and we'll see how that links up with what Marx and Nietzsche have said thus far. All right, this brings us now to what I want to talk about in Freud. I said I was going to mention a little bit of Moses and monotheism and civilization and its discontents. I'll just say there, and totem and taboo. There, generally what Freud is saying is that some of the issues that we have as a society result from our religious beliefs that we've inherited as a society. And in totem and taboo especially, and in Moses and monotheism, he gives us, that is Freud, gives us a sense of, some of our religious beliefs have developed out of kind of desires of society over time. So what we're going to be doing as a focal point here is we're going to be looking at this book, The Future of an Illusion. Again, this is one of his later works, and let's get right into it. I'm going to skip around quite a bit in here because it's not super long. In fact, for a Freud work, this is fairly short. But I want to focus on the main features and see if we can follow the flow of the argument. I think this is the most important. I think this is the most important work in Freud. I don't think it's his most important psychoanalytic work, but I think it's the most important work in Freud in general. I think it's just as I would say for Marx. I think it maybe be the Communist Manifesto. I'd honestly argue the German ideology is important. For Nietzsche, I'd end up saying it's the Beyond Good and Evil or the Genealogy of Morality. Here, this work, The Future of an Illusion, I think it's the most important work for Freud. How does he begin? With this, when one has lived for quite a long time in a particular civilization and has often tried to discover what its origins were and along what path it has developed, one sometimes also feels tempted to take a glance in the other direction and to ask what further fate lies before it and what transformations it is destined to undergo. But one soon finds that the value of such an inquiry is diminished from the outset by several factors, above all because there are only a few people who can survey human activity in its full compass. Most people have been obliged to restrict themselves to a single or a few fields of it. But the less a man knows about the past and the present, the more insecure must prove to be his judgment of the future. And there is the further difficulty that precisely in a judgment of this kind, the subjective expectations of the individual play a part, which is difficult to assess, and these turn out to be dependent on purely personal factors in his own experience, on the greater or lesser optimism of his attitude to life, and it has been dictated for him by his temperament or by his success or failure. Finally, the curious fact makes itself felt that in general people experience their present naively, as it were, without being able to form an estimate of its contents. They have first to put themselves at a distance from it, the present, that is to say, it must have become the past before it can yield points of vantage from which to judge the future. Freud is saying here something similar to what Marx and Nietzsche have said. We don't know ourselves. We're at a loss for ourselves. And also, historically, we don't really get things until they're the past. When we're in it, or when we're anticipating the future, we don't get it quite well. So he gets into
okay, well, what is human civilization? Human civilization, by which I mean all those respects in which human life has raised itself above its animal status and differs from the life of beasts, and I scorn to distinguish between culture and civilization, presents, as we know, two aspects to the observer. It includes, on the one hand, all the knowledge and capacity that men have acquired in order to control the forces of nature and extract its wealth for the satisfaction of human needs, and on the other hand, all the regulations necessary in order to adjust the relations of men to one another, and especially the distribution of the available wealth. This is very important for Freud. Freud says there are two aspects of culture or civilization. These are two aspects that make humans different from other species of animal, at least insofar as we're aware. We end up having a kind of collection of knowledge, of all the knowledge that we've acquired as a civilization or culture. One, that's the first aspect. And the second aspect is that we have a series of regulations that we impose on humanity. Okay? Various relations and ways in which we distribute wealth and resources. Now, you might hear the distribution of wealth and think, oh, that's communism, isn't it? Listen, regular monarchical taxation is still the distribution of wealth. It's just different from what you think of. All right, when you think of like a socialistic redistribution of wealth. So here's the deal. Again, we have the knowledge and all the stuff that we know, and all the rules that we impose. That's what makes society society. Like chimpanzees and ants, they don't have a social stock of knowledge, and they don't have rules in the same way. There might be norms that we can see in behavior in animals, but they don't have rules in the same way. You're not going to find a chiseled 10 Commandments in porcupine culture. It's not going to happen. But, he continues, the two trends of civilization are not independent of each other, firstly because the mutual relations of men are profoundly influenced by the amount of instinctual satisfaction which the existing wealth makes possible, secondly because an individual man can himself come to function as wealth in relation to another one, insofar as the other person makes use of his capacity for work, or chooses him as a sexual object, and thirdly, moreover, because every individual is virtually an enemy of civilization. Though civilization is supposed to be an object of universal human interest, it is remarkable that, little as men are able to exist in isolation, they should nevertheless feel as a heavy burden the sacrifices which civilization expects of them in order to make a communal life possible. There it seems to me Freud is describing resentment. We like civilization, we like the benefits, but we don't like having to obey all the rules and find ourselves in subjection to somebody. We're always going to have a boss. We don't get to be completely free in society. Thus, civilization has to be defended against the individual. Society is better, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. And so the notion of society has to constantly be defended. Now, one thus gets the impression that civilization is something which was imposed on a resisting majority by a minority which understood how to obtain possession of the means to power and coercion. That's Marx and Nietzsche for different reasons. It is, of course, natural to assume that these difficulties are not inherent in the nature of civilization itself, but are determined by the imperfections of the cultural forms which have so far been developed. And, in fact, it is not difficult to indicate those defects. While mankind has made continual advances in its control over nature, and may expect to make still greater ones, it is not possible to establish with certainty that a similar advance has been made in the management of human affairs, and probably at all periods, just as now, once again, many people have asked themselves whether what little civilization has thus acquired is indeed worth defending at all. One would think that a reordering of human relations should be possible, which would remove the sources of dissatisfaction with civilization by renouncing coercion and the suppression of the instincts, so that, undisturbed by internal discord, men might devote themselves to the acquisition of wealth and its enjoyment. That would be the golden age, but it is questionable if such a state of affairs can be realized. It seems rather that every civilization must be built up on the coercion and renunciation of this instinct. It does not even seem certain that if coercion were to cease, the majority of human beings would be prepared to undertake to perform the work necessary for acquiring new wealth. One has, I think, to reckon with the fact that there are present in all men destructive, and therefore, this is Todestrieb, like the death drive, in Freud, that we just do things to mess ourselves up. It's not that we're always trying to kill ourselves, but we just end up doing things almost with a kind of glee where we end up messing ourselves up. One has, I think, to reckon with the fact that there are present in all men destructive and therefore antisocial and anti-cultural trends, and that in a great number of people these are strong enough to determine their behavior in human society. What he's saying at this point is that there are two main features of civilization I want to reiterate. One is that we have continual knowledge. That's scientific knowledge, social scientific knowledge, cultural knowledge, like one of the things that we have in civilization that we wouldn't have, or we're just doing things as individuals, is our knowledge keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, and that's awesome. That's the first feature of civilization. The second feature of civilization is rules and regulations. What Freud has said, at least at this point, is our knowledge keeps expanding, but the way we impose rules and regulations gets more and more stupid over time. Like when we have knowledge expanding, but we have rules continuing, and we come up with even more rules and more laws, that seems peculiar, because the first seems liberating, and the latter seems problematic and more restrictive. It involves coercion. And so, he's going to say this leads to a kind of problem with civilization. Civilization, our knowledge keeps increasing, but our ability to regulate seems to get more problematic over time. We like having more technology, we like having more information, we like having more knowledge, but we don't like having more rules. So, for example, if you found out tomorrow that we could cure all diseases through technology, COVID's not a problem, HIV is not a problem, everything's been cured, it'd be awesome. We have knowledge and the means to do it. But if you found out we had more regulations, all right, there's more laws that you have to obey and things like that. Even if we could demonstrate that those laws would be good for society, we would find it kind of repugnant. We don't like regulation, but we like knowledge and advancement. That's our situation. And that's the problem, Freud is going to say, of our contemporary circumstance, where we have this kind of progressive scientific impetus. Okay, like we're going after science, we're acquiring new knowledge, but we still have what Freud's going to say, especially religion, like Nietzsche was saying in the Antichrist, holding us back. So I'm going to fast forward to the end here of this. There's a lot that Freud says about our development as a society. Let's take a look, page 700 here, section 5. Do a little bit of this, and we'll go forward a little bit more. Look at this paragraph. Let us now take up the thread of our inquiry. What, then, is the psychological significance of religious ideas, and under what heading are we to classify them? Are they part of knowledge, or are they part of those regulations? The question is not all easy to answer immediately. After rejecting a number of formulations, we will take our stand on the following one. Religious ideas are teachings and assertions about facts and conditions of external or internal reality, which tell one something one has not discovered for oneself, and which lay claim to one's belief. Since they give us information about what is most important and interesting to us in life, they are particularly highly prized. Anyone who knows nothing of them is very ignorant, and anyone who has added them to his knowledge may consider himself much the richer. So there's this peculiar thing about religion where what it does, Freud says here, is that it tells us things we wouldn't otherwise know, and apparently they present to us a system of facts that we import. So he says it seems to be the case that it's a bunch of knowledge, but it's a bunch of knowledge that really becomes a series of regulations. Let's go forward a little bit more. Let's see. For the section, I'm trying to figure out if I want to go to section 7. Let's go back right here. Section 6. This is on page 703. I think we've prepared the way sufficiently for an answer to the questions above, like where do religious ideas come from. It will be found that if we turn our attention to the psychical origin of religious ideas, these, which are given out as teachings, are not precipitates of experience or end results of thinking. They are illusions, fulfillments of the oldest
strongest. And here's what he means by illusions here. It's not just illusion, though, oh, it's stupid. Illusions are fulfillments of the oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes, that is, desires of mankind. What religious teachings are they basically come out of desires. We have, this is something that Feuerbach was getting at earlier, that we have these desires about the perfect father figure, and so we have the notion of a heavenly father, that we have our desires about something, and that what religion does is sort of almost an embodiment of the desires that we have. They're almost the manifestations of our cultural id. They're not, he says again, they're not the precipitates of experience or end results of thinking. They are illusions, and that's what an illusion is. Fulfillments of the oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes of mankind. The secret of their strength lies in the strength of those wishes. As we already know, the terrifying impression of helplessness in childhood aroused the need for protection through love, which was provided by the father, and the recognition of this helplessness last throughout life made it necessary to cling to the existence of a father, but this time a more powerful one, the heavenly Father. Thus, the benevolent rule of a divine providence allays our fear of the dangers of life. The establishment of a moral world order ensures the fulfillment of the demands of justice, which have so often remained unfulfilled in human civilization. And the prolongation of earthly existence in a future life provides the local and temporal framework in which these wish fulfillments, that's Freud, shall take place. Answers to the riddles that tempt the curiosity of man, such as how the universe began or what the relation is between body and mind, are developed in conformity with the underlying assumptions of this system. It is an enormous relief that the individual psyche, if the conflicts of its childhood arising from the father complex, conflicts which it is never wholly overcome, are removed from it and brought to a solution which is universally accepted. Religion helps us to cope with the world, which is, like Thomas Hobbes said, nasty, brutish, and short. That's why we have religion. It helps us cope with the world. It's a coping mechanism. This phrasing that comes with Freud, that's exactly what he's saying here. It's a comfort to us, even in its terror. Now, he continues, when I say that these things are illusions, I must define the meaning of the word. An illusion is not the same thing as an error, nor is it necessarily an error. So you hear illusion, you think, oh, religious people are stupid. He's not going Christopher Hitchens here or Richard Dawkins. It's not an error. Aristotle's belief that vermin are developed out of dung, a belief to which ignorant people still cling, was an error. So is the belief of a former generation of doctors that tabes dorsalis is the result of sexual excess. He's just mentioning things where people were wrong. It would be incorrect to call these errors illusions. On the other hand, it was an illusion of Columbus's that he had discovered a new sea route to the Indies. It's not that he was mistaken. It's that really he was misinterpreting reality. Okay, these people that thought something before, they were really wrong in what was going on. When Columbus thought, like, oh, I found a new way to India, not that he thought that the world was flat. I found a new way to India. He thought that, but really there was as Lacan will say, a méconnaissance, a misrecognition of what's going on. The part played by his wish in this era is very clear, and we'll see how that's different. One may describe it as an illusion, the assertion made by certain nationalists that the Indo-Germanic race is the only one capable of civilization, or the belief, which was only destroyed by psychoanalysis, me, Freud, that children are creatures without sexuality. Children have desires, and that's what he means by that. What is characteristic of illusions is that they are derived from human wishes. That's what makes an illusion illusion. We want something, and we're going to explain it in this way that might be mistaken, but it's from our wants. That's different from just being wrong or ignorant. What is characteristic of illusions is that they are derived from human wishes. In this respect, they come near to psychiatric delusions, similar to individual neuroses. But they differ from them, too, apart from the more complicated structure of delusions. In the case of delusions, we emphasize as essential their being in contradiction with reality. See, a delusion is at odds with what's going on. Someone sees something and they say, nope, I'm not seeing that at all. That's a delusion. Okay, a delusion is an interpretation that's completely at odds with what's going on. There's no way to interpret it that way at all whatsoever. And a delusion is where you're just so mistaken that you could not be. There's no way to interpret what's going on as the way you're interpreting it. An illusion, on the other hand, is a way that kind of makes sense unto itself, but is still a misrecognition or misrepresentation of what's going on. It's not 100% at odds. It's not completely wrong. It's that it comes from a mistaken framework, kind of like an ideology in Marx. In this respect, he says they come near to psychiatric delusions, but they differ from them too, apart from the more complicated structure of delusions. In the case of delusions, we emphasize as essential their being in contradiction with in reality. Illusions need not necessarily be false. That is to say, unrealizable or in contradiction to reality. For instance, a middle-class girl may have the illusion that a prince will come and marry her. That's possible. Like, it's unlikely, but it's possible. So we have an illusion might have a possibility to it. Okay, like it might be improbable, but it's possible. A delusion has an impossibility aspect to it. That's the difference. So let's say you're living in Österreich, in Austria, and you're a young girl and you think a prince will marry me one day. Probably not going to happen, but it could happen. Okay, but let's say you have a belief that, for example, hey, I'll see a round square tomorrow. That's not an illusion. That's delusional. That is not going to happen. Now, I know sometimes in English we conflate these words. We think when someone thinks something that's unlikely, we might say they're delusional. No, delusional is when someone is almost hoping on the impossible. An illusion is when someone is almost hoping on the improbable. That's the difference for Freud. Like he says here, this illusion. It's possible, but unlikely. Okay, few such cases have occurred. That the Messiah will come and found a golden age is much less likely. Why? Because we don't have instances to instantiate about it. Whether one classifies this belief as an illusion or as something analogous to a delusion will depend on one's personal attitude. Is the return of Christ, is that an illusion or delusion? Depends on your background. Examples of illusions which have proved true are not easy to find, but the illusion of the alchemist that all metals can be turned into gold might be one of them. So you might think of alchemy, it's like magic, I'm going to turn lead into gold. Listen, through nuclear fusion, we turn hydrogen into helium. We turn one element into another through the process of fusion. Through fission, we turn helium into hydrogen. We turn elements into other elements. Now, when you're talking about lead and gold, which are heavier elements, it would take so much energy to do. That's not happening. But it's not conceivably impossible. Like, there are ways in which we could turn lead into gold. It would just take so much energy to do it that it wouldn't be worth the gold to make. But it's conceivably possible. Illusion, but not a delusion. Going on, the wish to have a great deal of gold, as much gold as possible, has, it is true, been a good deal dampened by our present-day knowledge of the determinants of wealth. But chemistry no longer regards the transmutation of metals into gold as impossible. That's what Freud just said. Like, different things can turn into different substances can turn into different substances through molecular composition and through understanding of fusion and fission. Thus, we call a belief an illusion when a wish fulfillment is a prominent factor in its motivation, and in doing so we disregard its relations to reality, just as the illusion itself sets no store by verification. Having thus taken our bearings, let us return once more to the question of religious doctrines. We can now repeat that all of them are illusions and insusceptible of proof. Like, maybe religious aspects have a point, but maybe not. It's possible, but probably not. No one can be compelled to think them true, to believe in them. Some of them are so improbable, so incompatible with everything we have laboriously discovered about the reality of the world, that we may compare them, if we make proper regard to the psychological differences, to delusions. There are things in religion that he says are illusions, others that are delusions. Of the reality value of most of them, we cannot judge, just as they cannot be proved, so they cannot be refuted. Arguments from silence. We still know too little to make a critical approach to them. The riddles of the universe reveal themselves only slowly to our investigation. There are many questions to which science today can give no answer, but scientific work is the only road which can lead us to a knowledge of reality outside ourselves. That's a declarative statement. Science is the way to go, not religion, says Freud. It is once again merely an illusion to expect anything from intuition and introspection. They can give us nothing but particulars about our own mental life, which are hard to interpret, never any information about the questions which religious doctrine finds so easy to answer. Oh, God did it. Or, oh, something bad happened? Sin. Yeah, that's the way religious doctrine works. If you have simply an explanatory faculty, you just plug that in. That's religious doctrine. There's a certain sense in which that can apply to science. If something happens and you just go, gravity, you probably don't have a good scientific understanding of things. Okay, possibly. That might be one way of interpreting it. Like he says here, at this point, one must expect to meet with an objection. Well then, if even obdurate skeptics admit the assertions of religion cannot be refuted by reason, why should I not believe in them? So if someone says, like, it's possible they're true, why should I disbelieve in them? Since they have so much on their side. Tradition, the agreement of mankind, and all the consolations they offer. Like, people have been doing this for hundreds of years. A lot of people agree on it, and they make us feel good. Why not indeed? Just as no one can be forced to believe, so no one can be forced to disbelieve. But do not let us be satisfied with deceiving ourselves that arguments like these take us along the road of correct thinking. If ever there was a case of a lame excuse, we have it here. Ignorance is ignorance. No right to believe anything can be derived from it. In other matters, no sensible person will behave so irresponsibly or rest content with such feeble grounds for his opinions and for the line he takes. It is only in the highest and most sacred things that he allows himself to do so. In reality, these are only attempts at pretending to oneself, to other people, that one is still firmly attached to religion, when one has long since cut oneself loose from it. What he's saying here is that most of the time when it comes to religious belief, we kind of do it to kind of play for the team, the religious team we're on, but in many respects we've divorced ourselves from it. We don't really think that way. We do not think like people thought in the 500. Even if you're a Christian today in 2020, you don't think like a Christian in 1520. That person, their entire life is saturated. Every instance of their life is saturated in religious belief. Okay, if they're devout, maybe they don't have a knowledge of the text that they should. And someone today, their mind goes elsewhere. They don't consign themselves to it. Where questions of religion are concerned, people are guilty of every possible sort of dishonesty and intellectual misdemeanor. Philosophers stretch the meaning of words until they retain scarcely anything of their original sense. They give the name of God to some vague abstraction which they have created for themselves, having done so they can pose before all the world as deists, as believers of God, and they can even boast that they have recognized a higher, purer concept of God, notwithstanding that their God is now nothing more than an insubstantial shadow and no longer the mighty personality of religious doctrines. No, we don't believe in the God of the Bible. We talk about a higher power or some sort of pantheistic entity or something like that. Yeah, it's the same thing. You're kidding yourselves. Further, Section 7, having recognized religious doctrines as illusions, we are once faced by a further question. May not other cultural assets of which we hold a high opinion, and by which we let our lives be ruled, be of a similar nature? So we've talked about religion, like, remember, just like Marx said, critique begins in the critique of religion, in religious doctrine. Freud's asking a similar question here. Just like we're starting here talking about religious doctrines as illusions, what else do we do on an everyday basis that are also illusions? Okay? Are we letting our lives be ruled of a similar nature? Must not the assumptions that determine our political regulations be called illusions as well? Very similar to, not the same language, not the same framework, but a similar kind of suspicion. Maybe our political beliefs are illusions. Is it not the case that in our civilization the relations between the sexes are disturbed by an erotic illusion, or a number of such illusions? Are our sexual ethics, our sexual mores and norms, and gender mores and norms, are they illusions as well? Not that they're wrong, but they come from a framework that might be otherwise. That's Freud, I think, is at his most progressive. And once our suspicion has been aroused, We should not shrink from asking, too, whether our conviction that what we can learn, whether our conviction that we can learn about something about external reality through the use of observation and reasoning in scientific work, whether this conviction has any better foundation. Nothing ought to keep us from directing our observation to our own selves, or from applying our thought to criticism of itself. There's that word, critique. In this field, a number of investigations open out before us, whose results could not be but decisive for the construction of a Weltanschauung. That is the German word for worldview. That we all have these worldviews that we construct. Weltanschauung, literally like Anschauung, literally Schauung like means to shine, like we have our own shine, or the way that things appear to us, and so Welt is world, so literally the world appearance. But in English, I think that translates best as worldview, or kind of perspective, but perspective in the sense of the whole framework. That word is first used by Kant in the Critique of Judgment. We surmise, moreover, that such an effort would not be wasted, and that it would at least in part justify our suspicion. But the author does not dispose of the means for undertaking so comprehensive a task. He needs must confine his work to following out one only of these illusions, that namely of religion. But now the loud voice of our opponent brings us to a halt. We are called to account for our wrongdoing. What wrongdoing? Here's what someone might say. Archaeological interests are no doubt most praiseworthy, but no one undertakes the excavation if by doing so he's going to undermine the habituations of the living so that they collapse and bury people under their ruins. In other words, no one would go into archaeology if they find out it's going to kill people or be harmful. They wouldn't do it. Okay? Like, knowledge is great, but if knowledge ended up being harmful, you wouldn't do it, would you? Someone might object. The doctrines of religion are not a subject one can quibble about like any other. So we can talk about, did the Romans do this? Did the Phoenicians do that? Did the Han Dynasty do this? Did the Mauryan Empire do this? Fairly, we can do that without dispute. But the doctrines of religion are not a subject that one can quibble about like any other. They have a certain kind of severity to them. Our civilization is built up on them, and the maintenance of human society is based on the majority of men's believing in the truth of those doctrines. It might be Christianity in Europe. It might be Confucianism in China. They're not just one. Freud certainly has Christianity and Judaism in mind, but it might be Islam in Arabia. So it need not be Christianity, but typically it is. We have like some sort of religious framework that is just kind of taken as a given in a particular context. Okay? So our civilization is built on them, and the maintenance of human society is based on the majority of men's believing in the truth of those doctrines. If men are taught that there is no almighty and all just God, no divine world order, and no future life, they will feel exempt from all obligations to obey the precepts of civilization. Well, we can't allow that. That's why we got to burn heretics. Everyone will, without inhibition or fear, follow his asocial, egoistic instincts and seek to exercise his power. Chaos, which we have banished through many thousands of years of the work of civilization, that will come again. Even if we knew and could prove that religion was not in possession of the truth, we ought to conceal the fact and behave in the way prescribed by the philosophy of as if, and this in the interest of the preservation of us all. And apart from the danger of the undertaking, it would be a purposeless cruelty. Countless people find their one consolation in religious doctrines and can only bear a life with their help. What he's saying here is, he's kind of describing the notion of, like, even if God is dead, okay? Even if we knew and can prove that religion is not in the possession of the truth, what's going to happen? People are going to do exactly what Nietzsche said. They're going to keep the same doctrines anyway. Like, we're going to tone them down. We don't believe in that because God said so, but because basically the ideas are still basically correct. That's what we're going to do, huh? So Freud is not going to be a fan of that. What is he going to say? Well, I'm going to get here to his denouement at the end. So let me go a little bit forward here, where he starts talking about
the notion of logos as almost a divine entity in section, I want to say 9 or 10 here. So let's take a look at this. So let's move on to section 10 here, 718. The previous question was a quotation here in German, den Himmel überlassen wir den Engel und den Spatzen. We live in heaven to the angels and the sparrows. We make things palatable for all. 718, section 10, future of illusion. That sounds great. A race of men who have renounced all illusions and have thus become capable of making their existence on Earth tolerable. That sounds like a great future. However, I cannot share your expectations, and that is not because I'm an obstinate reactionary you perhaps take me for. No, it's because I'm sensible. We seem now to have exchanged roles. You emerge as an enthusiast who allows himself to be carried away by illusions, and I stand for the claims of reason, the rights of skepticism. What you have been expounding seems to me to be built on errors, which, following your example, I may call illusions, but because they betray clearly enough the influence of your wishes. What he's saying here is he's saying basically he's taking up a notion of he's in an argument with someone who's a defender of religion and himself the skeptic. And there's a lot of back and forth. You think this. I think this. And so let's get to where he really gets to the point. All right, so let's look at here. Page 720. And there are 2 points that I must dwell on a little longer. Firstly, the weakness of my position does not imply any strengthening of yours. I think you are defending a lost cause. We may insist as often as we like that man's intellect is powerless in comparison with his instinctual life. Okay, that there are instincts that we have that are really, really strong, and our intellect sometimes doesn't overcome them. And we may be right in this. Nevertheless, there is something peculiar about this weakness. The voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest till it has gained a hearing. Finally, after a countless succession of rebuffs, it succeeds. In other words, just a kind of hope and reason. Like, yeah, human beings are really given into their instincts, but sometimes when we try hard, reason wins. This is one of the few points on which one may be optimistic about the future of mankind, but it is in itself a point of no small importance, and from it one can derive yet other hopes. The primacy of the intellect lies, it is true, in a distant, distant future. Mankind is not there yet, but maybe it will be. But probably not an infinitely distant one. It will presumably set itself the same aims as those whose realization you expect from your God, of course with human limits, as far as an external reality. Anagki, in Greek. A God of restraint. Okay? Like your God is a God of don't do this, don't do that. It's that second element that he said that what society, like civilization, remember civilization, we have this big bulk of knowledge that comes out of it, and then the second part is a regulatory capacity where society ends up being about rules, don't do this, don't do that. And he's like, well, you, religious people, your God is basically the regulatory God. You want restriction, constraint, conservatism in the sense of let's restrain, let's conserve the way things are, let's preserve. Namely, what that is the love of man and the decrease of suffering. Noble, that's fine. This being so, we may tell ourselves that our antagonism is only a temporary one and not irreconcilable. We desire the same things. But you are more impatient, more exacting, and, why should I not say it, more self-seeking than I and those on my side, you religious adherents. You would have the state of bliss begin directly after death. Everything will be fine after you die. You go to heaven, right? That's when things will be good. Great, says Freud. It's like all your ends are great, but you put them elsewhere in the external. This is something Feuerbach warned against, and Marx and Nietzsche in their own ways. We desire the same things, but you are more impatient, more exacting, and, why should I not say it, more self-seeking than I and those on my side. You would have the state of bliss begin directly after our death. You expect the impossible from it, and you will not surrender the claims of the individual. Our God, Logos, which means reason. Literally, it's where we get our word logic and logo and biology and things like that. Our God, he's not saying there's an actual God of logos or anarchy, but these are basically almost the avatars for our senses of thought. Our God, Logos, okay, will fulfill whichever of these wishes nature outside us allows, but he will do it very gradually, only in the unforeseeable future and for a new generation of men. Almost sounds like Nietzsche's concept of die Übermenschen. He promises no compensation for us, who suffer grievously from life. On the way to the distant goal, your religious doctrines will have to be discarded, no matter whether the first attempts fail, or whether the first substitutes prove to be untenable. You know why. In the long run, nothing can withstand reason and experience. And the contradiction which religion offers to both is all too palpable. Even purified religious ideas cannot escape this fate, so long as they try to preserve anything of the consolation of religion. No doubt if they confine themselves to a belief in a higher spiritual being whose qualities are indefinable and whose purposes cannot be discerned, like you boil religions down so much you're not really saying anything anymore, they will be proof against the challenge of science, but then they will also lose their hold on human interest. And secondly, observe the difference between your attitude to illusions and mine. You have to defend the religious illusions with all your might. Okay, when a religious belief comes into conflict with science, you got to do all your best to defend it. No, this is the way it is. Like, it might seem otherwise, but it's not. You have to defend the religious illusion with all your might. If it becomes discredited, and indeed the threat to it is great enough, then your world collapses. There is nothing left for you but to despair of everything, of civilization and the future of mankind. From that bondage we are free, since we are prepared to renounce a good part of our infantile wishes. Okay, out of our collective oral phase. We can bear it if a few of our expectations turn out to be illusions. Scientists should be, they aren't always, but they should be willing to, if they have a view, to be willing to give it up if they get more evidence otherwise. Freud is saying here, religious adherents can't do that. Education freed from the burden of religious doctrines will not, it may be, affect much change in men's psychological nature. Our God, Logos, is perhaps not a very almighty one, and he may only be able to fulfill a small part of what his predecessors have promised. If we have to acknowledge this, we shall accept it with resignation. We shall not on that account lose our interest in the world and in life, like Nietzsche. For we have one sure support which you lack. We believe that it's possible for scientific work to gain some knowledge about the reality of the world, by means of which we can increase our power, and in accordance with which we can arrange our life. If this belief is an illusion, then we're in the same position as you. But science has given us evidence by its numerous and important successes that it is no illusion. It has made things happen, and we have gained insight by it. Science has many open enemies. Again, you might find this interesting because most people would say Freud's not a science today, but look at, he's a science fanboy here. Science has many open enemies and more secret ones. Among those who cannot forgive her for having weakened religious faith and for threatening to overthrow it, she is reproached for the smallness of the amount that she has taught us and for the incomparably greater field she has left in obscurity. But in this, people forget how young she is, how difficult her beginnings were, and how infinitesimally small is the period of time since the human intellect has been strong enough for the tasks she sets, maybe since the Enlightenment is what he has in mind. Are we not at all at fault in basing our judgments on periods of time that are too short? We should make the geologists our pattern. People complain of the unreliability of science, how she announces as a law today what the next generation recognizes as an error and replaces by a new law whose accepted validity lasts no longer. But this is unjust and in part untrue. The transformations of scientific opinion, are developments, advances, not revolutions. A law which was held at first to be universally valid proves to be a special case of a more comprehensive uniformity, or is limited by another law, not discovered till later. A rough approximation to the truth is replaced by a more carefully adapted one, which in turn awaits further perfectioning. There are various fields which we have not yet surmounted a phase of research in which we make trial with hypotheses that soon have to be rejected as inadequate. He's talking about the
Science, we think we know things, and we find out, well, we don't know things. We have to learn more and more and more and more and more. Finally, an attempt has been made to discredit scientific endeavor in a radical way on the ground that being bound to the conditions of our own organization, it can yield nothing else than subjective results, whilst the real nature of things outside ourselves remains inaccessible. Hyper-Kantians, I suppose. But this is to disregard several factors which are of decisive importance for the understanding of scientific work. In the first place, our organization, that is, our mental apparatus, has been developed precisely in the attempt to explore the external world, and it must therefore have realized in its structure some degree of expediency. And in the second place, it itself a constituent part of the world which we set out to investigate. That is, it's something we ourselves are something to study, and it readily admits of such investigation. Thirdly, the task of science is fully covered if we limit it to showing how the world must appear to us in consequence of the particular character of our organizations. Sure, the way that we do science, we're talking about how the world is to us. That's granted. Fourthly, the ultimate findings of science, precisely because of the way in which they are acquired, are determined not only by our organization, or I would really say here our constitution, but by the things which have affected that organization. Finally, the problem of the nature of the world without regard to our percipient mental apparatus is an empty abstraction. There's no way to talk about the world without us in it talking about it, devoid of practical interest. We can talk about the world without us, but what would that be? We wouldn't be able to talk about it if we weren't here. No, our science is no illusion. But an illusion it would be to suppose that what science cannot give us, we can get elsewhere. So I give you here, now again, the next book in your book is Civilization and its Discontents. But I think what Freud has to say here in The Future of Illusion, where he puts basically two gods in opposition to each other, much like Apollo and Dionysius in Nietzsche, where we have the Agaki and Logos. And he said, listen, science is the future. He's not saying it's a god. He's almost talking about it as metaphorically a god. Like, this is Logos as the patron saint of scientific wisdom. Like, we're open to change. We're open to recognize that there are problems here. He's like, you don't get that in religion. You don't get that, it's open to new interpretations. It's open to revision. Like, our scientific models can change. And he says they're not revolutions, strangely. He really talks about not that science is just simply, shining a light on something and then recognizing a fact out there, but that it builds and things change and they alter over time. And this is a process. Religion's not a process. It's almost a starting from the outset that you have to believe this. This is why someone like Michael Ruse would say creation science is not science, because what happens there is when you already believe that creation is science, that intelligent design is true, then all the investigations you do, you only do them in order to fulfill the notions that you've already presupposed. Now, I will also submit, as critics of Freud and others have said, that maybe scientists do the same thing. They have some sort of presupposition. They end up just trying to confirm their presupposition. But Freud is saying here, at least, that's not really what scientists do. They find something new, and people used to think something else, and it changes. Our scientific models will probably change in the future. Okay? And maybe they get more or less accurate, but they certainly get more or less better in terms of what we can do with them. And that is the undercurrent of the school of suspicion, that the way in which this culture, especially in the West, has been for the last several centuries in particular, and maybe the last millennia, has forced us, members of that society, that culture, that civilization, into a false sense of security where we believe things that we ought not to believe. And Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, in spite of them all being, critical of the way in which we look at the world, all have a sense of optimism in looking at the future, whether it be through Marx's notion of dialectical materialism, like this is where the future is going. Nietzsche, here are the philosophers of the future. Freud here's what, when we embrace the god of Logos, here's what the world's going to look like. They all have an optimism about what the future can hold by abandoning the old way of looking at things and embracing a new future, and that new future is predicated upon seeing the world in a different way and getting rid of the antiquated ways in which we conceive the world.